Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. This is a story of how I forged a flathead fire axe with pattern welded Damascus steel. This is a custom order that I'm finally getting to, and pretty neat project. A little different than anything I've done before. But I'm starting with 1-inch thick blocks of 1060 steel that I cut off of a bar. That's much longer than what I'm working with, obviously. So we've got 1 inch by 3 inches by 2 inches. No, excuse me, 1.5 inches. And that's our 1060 steel. And then we've got some 15 and 20 to go in between there. And I was just checking to see that that stack was going to fit in my forge. Now, it would make a little more sense to make the stack a little bit wider in the dimension and maybe not so tall. But I was making it to fit the 15 and 20 pieces that I had, which are thicker than what you typically see on the 15 and 20 in your Damascus steel or pattern welded steel stack. So this is what, 9 layers here, and we're going to forge weld this up here. Now, the finished project here is supposed to be about 6 pounds. The axe head is supposed to be about 6 pounds. And I've got a little over 6 pounds here at the moment. Now this diesel dip is helpful in the forge weld process, protects the steel, provides some carbon content on the surface. And of course some borax for the flux. Once we get it up to temperature, that's going to be crucial in keeping the steel protected and clean any oxides, that kind of thing. If you have a super tight stack, you can do without this sometimes, but the borax just makes it a lot more foolproof, I guess. Get it up to welding heat, and we'll go ahead and compress the stack little by little and give those welds a good chance to set and make a nice solid block of steel. You notice I finally got a cheese shaker or whatever that is for my borax, and I wish I'd done that a long time ago. Had people on the channel here suggesting that some time ago, and I finally got around to doing that, but it does make the borax application a lot easier and a lot more uniform, and you waste a lot less. So it was $6 or $7 well spent. So we've got that stack compressed down, and after it's cooled off, we'll go ahead and cut it up into 5 pieces, and that will give us about 45 layers here on our second weld, our second stack. Of course, I've added some thinner 15 and 20 pieces in between each of the blocks, and that'll give us a couple of layers and some additional components to the finished pattern. And we'll go ahead and cut that in half. This is a drift, axe drift that I forged specifically for this project and for future projects, because I didn't have a full-sized axe eye drift yet. And this is just a double stack weld here. This is our third weld pass, and that will give us about 90 layers here on our pattern welded steel. That axe drift is H13 steel, and so it's forged mostly to shape and then grind that a little bit. So this piece right here is is another piece of 1060, and my plan here is to forge weld this in between our 2 pieces of 90 layer Damascus steel. So it's unless I point it out, it might not be readily apparent, but if you'll notice the weight on the scale each time I put our pieces of steel on the scale, you'll notice that we're losing a significant amount of weight, and that's pretty easy to do just with the decarb, or the scaling, I should say, on the steel during the forging process, but also during pattern welded steel stacks. I end up cut off the ends that are a little bit cruddy, and so you lose some steel that way. And so it's very easy to lose mass, and it's pretty difficult to maintain that weight. So here we've finally got a layer count. We've got that drop forged there, and we've got our 1060 monosteel piece sandwiched in between here. But I have to forge this billet into a shape that will actually work to forge an axe out of. and you can see it there. The problem is that our weight was not where it needed to be. It was about a pound too light, and with more forging processes to do as well as grinding, that was just going to be too light for the finished size of the project. So I went ahead and added some more layers on the outside, on the top and bottom of the billet, and it's going to add some additional pattern components in the finished product, but also the weight that we need. So we finally got that to where I can go ahead and actually start forging an axe from this billet. You'll notice the dimensions of the billet here. This is pretty appropriate dimensions for forging an axe out of, but this is a big chunk of steel. This is bigger than anything I've ever forged, about over twice as big as any axe I've ever forged. So not only am I doing my first full-size axe, I'm going a little overboard, I guess, on it due to the nature of the project. So we'll go ahead and get this eye punched here, and I'm just going very carefully because at this point, with all the work that I have into this billet, goodness, if I screw it up at this point, that's a huge amount of time and work that would be lost. So trying to be really careful here, get a really good punch here, and we did, and the plug even came out nicely here, which doesn't always happen, but you'll see that here in just a minute. Lining this up, make sure that the two holes meet on either side properly. So I wanted to mention this is a flathead fire axe. So a lot of times you think of a fire axe, you've got like the pick or the hawk's bill or whatever on the back side, whatever it's called, and that is one style of fire axe. But the flathead fire axe is also commonly used, and it's more of like a I don't know, sort of a light splitting maul, if you will, with some chopping ability, because you have a pull on the back side of it for smashing stuff, and you have a hefty bit for chopping stuff as well. So it's a multi-purpose tool, often used in conjunction with the Halligan tool, I believe it's called, which is like a massive pry bar. And so firefighters will use these two things to vent structures and things like that during the event of a fire and different things that they do. So I'm not super familiar with it, but I did a little bit of research on just what a flathead fire axe looks like, since I needed to build one. And we're going to go ahead and do this. This is a special project for my client ordered for a commemorative type gift for a retirement, is what it is from a fire department. So we've got our eye punched, and we're starting the drifting process. So I'm starting with a relatively small drift. We're just opening that eye up here. And again, this is significantly more steel to work with on your typical axe. Even a full-size axe typically is not going to be 5 or 6 pounds. And so, things move a little bit slower, and you have to just keep going. But I guess the one nice thing is it does hold the heat longer than your typical axe billet does, so that's fine. So I'm just working my drifts up here, and it doesn't really work that well to try to balance it there and hit it with the hammer until the drift is at least partway through, and then it can kind of sit still for you. But this is my full-size drift here, and we're getting closer to the finished size on the eye, but I don't want to go all the way up until I've done the forging on the bit and that kind of thing. So one of the features on a flathead fire axe that I seem to notice is sort of a drop down to the bit there, which kind of gives sort of a hook that you can use to like pull open a door or something to that effect. And so we're going to use a fuller here and move that material a little bit before we start forging out the bit. Now this billet was so long that I wasn't able to fit it crossways into my press like I typically do, so I had to move things around and forge from different angles than I typically do. So it was just a little bit more challenging in those respects, just because it's so large. So here I'm resetting one of the welds here that started to come apart with that aggressive forging on the bit here. And I got that, got some borax on there and heated it back up and used the hammer and the press to get that set back, and it was good to go after that. But with a real aggressive forging like that on the bias of a weld, it's not uncommon for it to want to separate on you a little bit. So you can see what I'm talking about here a little bit. Just having to work with the size of this thing is a little bit more challenging than your typical hatchet or axe. Using a variety of tools to try to forge the bit down, and I don't want to forge it down too much. This whole thing is a pretty thick, massive build to it, and then I do have to come back and grind the surface off so that we can etch and reveal the Damascus pattern on here. So what I would typically do is leave a forged finish on my axes or hatchets, but that's not what's happening in this case, obviously. So go ahead and stamp in the commemorative numbers and letters in there for this particular project, and went ahead and normalized this in the forge a couple of times, and we'll let it sit there and cool down for the last time. So everything is going together pretty well here. The eye turned out nice and straight. And so went ahead and quenched it, and I thought I had my camera on. Unfortunately, I did not. So this is like right at the end as I'm making sure that the steel is cooled down enough to where I'm not going to get excessive auto tempering. But the quench was pretty uneventful. Just had a minimal, very short flare up just because of the mass of the steel there. Went right out, and of course, continued the quenching process, and pull it out of the temper for 2 hours. And we'll go ahead and grind this thing, being careful, of course, to not overheat the steel. So using my KMG grinders here on this one, the tilting one, it's got a 3 horsepower motor, which I find quite handy for heavier grinding applications, because the 2 horsepower motor is great for most things, but if you get really aggressive on it, it can bog it down a little bit. So I really enjoy that 3 horsepower. So we've got this finished up to 220 grit. I'm going to go ahead and do an etch on it, and this etch was pretty aggressive. I had it in and out probably 3 or 4 times cleaning the oxides off, but I actually left it in overnight all total, and so had a lot of time in the etch, nice deep etch. So once we've got that squared away and cleaned up, it's time to create a haft for this axe, and I went and sketched out a nice 32-inch handle here, which was the requested length on this project. And it's got a nice fawn's foot on there, but nothing too aggressive. And I like the way it looks, and I think it looks like a fire axe, but I kind of like that shape anyway, and I'll probably be using that in future full-size felling axe projects here in the not too distant future. Especially since I have a full-size eye drift now, we can actually build a full-size axe. Let's get this handle fitted to the eye here, and it's just little by little, tap it in a little bit, check and see where it's hanging up, and take that material off and come back and try it again. So, back and forth multiple times. I don't want to force this in too much. I want it to, go in with minimal force before we wedge it. So removing that material as you go is important. Now that I have the handle fitted to the eye, I can go ahead and shape the handle and grind all the corners off of the hickory here and get a nice ergonomic handle. So we've got that done and hand sanded down with some emery cloth. And I don't typically do a scorched finish on it, but this seemed appropriate for a fire axe, plus the nice dark handle I think will go well with the pattern welded Damascus head. So I went ahead and did a nice scorched finish on the handle in this case, and we'll get this completely done here, get it wedged up, and we're just about finished here. Use my ball bearing knife to clean up the corners here on the handle, and some nice application of linseed oil, boiled linseed oil, to the entire piece here, and especially the wood, of course. You know, when you scorch it like that, definitely needs some additional attention with the oil there. So there's the finished product, and I think it turned out pretty good. You know, this was definitely a learning process, but I think the overall project is pretty impressive, and the heft and the design of the axe head is pretty cool. So you can see there the layering on the Damascus main piece, and then the different pieces on either the top and bottom there. Kind of brings it all together. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget that you can support the channel simply by hitting the like button, subscribing, leaving a comment, all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys watching as always, and we will see you on the next video.